One of the bases of inner bonding is the concept of intention. And that at any given moment, there's only one of two intentions available. One is to have control over your feelings, over people, how they feel about you, over outcomes, and virtually all of us have learned to try and have control in many ways. The other intention is the intention to learn about loving yourself and then being able to share your love with others. So as I learned to open to learning, all of a sudden, I had this connection. It was like magical. It was amazing. So I thought, okay, I'm going to teach this to my clients and they're going to be able to have this connection. But it didn't work that way. It took me a long time to really connect the dots here. And I finally realized that it's about frequency. And frequency is the rate at which you vibrate. Now, your thoughts create a frequency. For example, if you're angry and blaming, you're going to have a low frequency. But if you're loving and caring and happy, you're going to have a high frequency. Your thoughts have a lot to do with that. But so does your body. So what I realized is that since I had been eating well for all those years, my body was also operating in a high frequency. And the combination of the intention to learn about loving myself and eating well enabled me to have that at-will divine connection. So then I started to realize that I needed to work with people not only on the emotional level and spiritual level, but on the physical level. Because if they were putting junk in their bodies, the energy of their body was too low to access that divine love, that divine wisdom, which is here for all of us. We're born with the capacity to tap into that. We were not dropped here alone. We don't have to figure everything out for ourselves. We get to tap into that higher wisdom. And we all have the capacity to do that at will. So this is what this book is about. The first half is about the physical, and the second half is about inner bonding, which I'm going to be sharing with you. So I want to talk about anxiety and depression because it's a really big issue, as Chris was talking about. So many of the herbs help with that, certainly how you eat. We got plenty of people here talking about what affects your gut, which certainly affects the brain and can create anxiety and depression when you're eating junk. So I have found three causes of anxiety and depression. One is unhealed childhood abuse. The other is the physical, what I call physical self-abandonment, eating junk. And the third is the emotional self-abandonment. And that's what I'm going to be talking about because we got plenty of people here talking about the physical. So the physical, as I said, the junk food and all that, it lowers the frequency of your body. It stops you from connecting. It disrupts your gut. It creates toxicity, goes into your brain, and there's no way that it enhances how you feel, your mood, and your ability to divinely connect. So many of us are operating from that place in our mind. We're not present in our body, with our heart, with our soul. We cannot connect to our divine source when we're in our head, when we're focused in the mind, because the frequency is low. It generates fear. And that's where a lot of the anxiety and depression comes from this self-abandonment. If you were to say to a kid, for example, you're going to a party and you better impress everybody there. You better say the right thing. You better do the right thing. That kid's going to be like this, right? Going to be tense, going to be anxious. Well, we do that to ourselves. And if the kid comes to you and needs help and you're, in your mind, you're on your computer, you're reading a book, you don't pay attention, that kid's going to feel abandoned, rejected, anxious, depressed. That's what we're doing to ourselves. The third way we avoid responsibility for our feelings and abandon and reject ourselves is we turn to various addictions to numb out. Whether it's substances, whether it's activities, there's so many. There's food, alcohol, drugs, nicotine, there's TV, there's sports, there's gambling, there's sex, there's pornography, there's work. Anything that we use, even meditation, anything that we use to avoid feeling our feelings becomes an addiction, a way of abandoning ourselves. And so let's say you're feeling upset about something and you just surf the channels. Well, that's again like a child, comes you upset, and instead of attending to the child, you're watching TV, surfing the channels. That child's going to feel abandoned by you and might get anxious or depressed. Now, the fourth way is that we make other people responsible for our feelings. We blame them. It's like, again, let's say you have a child, and instead of wanting to love that child, you're looking for somebody else to give the child to. Now, even if somebody else, like I said last night, even if somebody else loves that child's going to feel rejected by you, abandoned by you. So even if somebody else actually loves you, as long as you're making that person responsible for your happiness and well-being and sense of worth and safety, that inner child, which is your feeling self, your soul, your essence, is going to feel abandoned and rejected by you. That's going to create anxiety and depression. So this is one of the major causes. And then, if people take a medication, they are further numbing out their feelings. Now, like Chris says, the medication has horrible side effects. And so not only does it have horrible side effects, but it's another way of abandoning yourself. Instead of learning how to attend to your feelings and learn from them and take care of them, it's another form of self-abandonment. When I talk about the core self, there's a lot of words for this. The core self, the true self, the inner child, the essence, the soul. It all means the same thing. It's who you really are, the spark of the divine that is within each of us. And as I said, the wounded self is the part of us that has absorbed so many hundreds of false beliefs about ourselves, about others, about spirit, about control. This part of us just wants to control everything. Wants to control our feelings, believes we can't handle them, wants to control others and how they feel about us, wants to control outcomes, which we actually can't do. So this part of us is all about control. The loving adult is who we are when we're open to learning about loving ourselves. It has to start with ourselves. We got to learn to fill ourselves up with love, to see and value ourselves, and then we can share that with others. This is not about being selfish and self-centered and just being focused on ourselves. That's not actually loving to ourselves at all. This is about learning to see and value and take responsibility for ourselves, for our health, for our well-being, and then we are in a position to share our love with others, which is the most glorious experience in life, is the sharing of love. Whether you're sharing it with a partner, or you're sharing it with a child, excuse me, or you're sharing it as a volunteer, you're sharing it to help others, it's the most wonderful experience in life. Unfortunately, a lot of people who volunteer, they're not full of love. They're volunteering in order to get love. They're volunteering in order to get approval. And the energy is completely different. We can pick up the energy of somebody who's full of love, who's coming from love, and just get so much joy out of sharing it. and somebody who's doing it in order to get approval, to get validation, to get love back. It feels completely different. And the only thing that's really healing is when we share love from a full heart and soul. And in order to do that, you've got to learn to love yourself first. It has to start with that. If you're abandoning yourself, you're creating an emptiness inside. You're creating an emptiness that's like a vacuum. And so when you're with somebody, that emptiness wants to get love. And I'm sure many of you have had the experience of feeling drained when you're with somebody. Somebody who's an energy vampire, somebody who's empty and trying to get you to fill them up. It doesn't feel good. But this is because they're abandoning themselves, and they don't realize that that's what's happening. And they think the only way to feel filled up is by something external to them, whether they fill up with food or somebody else's attention and approval. It's external. This is about learning to fill yourself internally, because we all have a source of love. That's this divine connection. What we live in is unconditional love. And so when you learn to tap into it, and you learn to take responsibility for your own feelings, then you can fill yourself up with love. Let's look at this a little more closely. Again, I'm sorry, it says the spiritual path of fear, but it should say the earthly path of fear. You can see that you have choice to try and control or to love in the face of fear, that the purpose of the ego is to get love and avoid pain, and the purpose of the loving adult is to give love to yourself and to others. The intention of the wounded self is to find your happiness and worth externally, and the purpose of the loving adult is to bring it through from our higher guidance and learn to give it to ourselves. The desire is to protect against pain and avoid responsibility for it. The desire of the loving adult is to learn to love and take responsibility for your own pain and your own joy. So you can see, hopefully those of you that don't have a chart, and it is kind of dark, you probably can't see them, but you turn to all of these addictive behaviors, to anger and blaming and interrogating and scapegoating other people, making them responsible, criticizing, just on and on. So many different ways of manipulating others. That's what the wounded self does. It wants to manipulate and control others into giving you what you're not giving yourself. Now, please be very gentle with yourself about this. No judgment, because we all do this. We have all learned to do this. We grew up learning to do this. It was role modeled for us. So we don't want to judge ourselves for this at all. We want to be very kind and compassionate about this wounded part of ourselves that wants to manipulate and control others. If you judge yourself for doing it, you're stuck. There's no way to understand it. There's no way to heal it when you judge yourself for it. We get addicted to people. We get addicted to activities, to things. We get addicted to substances. Let me go through the steps of inner bonding. Step one, and I went through this very briefly last night. Step one is that you learn to get present. And let's just do this right now for a moment. I want you to take some deep breaths. Take some deep breaths and put your mind on your breath. This is a mindfulness practice. And as you breathe, let your breath take you from mind focus into body focus. Putting your mind on your breath, breathing in, and letting your breath breathe down into your body and get inside your body. And as you're breathing, scan your body. Notice any physical sensations, because
Emotions often show up physically, like if you feel any tension somewhere. There's an emotion attached, often anxiety, some other emotion. So just scan your body. Notice if what you feel, if there's any fluttering, any emptiness, any tension anywhere, butterflies, feeling of aloneness inside. Just notice. Or maybe there's a positive feeling. Maybe you're excited. Maybe you feel full. See, those feelings, the positive feelings are letting you know that you're taking loving care of yourself in that moment. But anything other than peace and fullness inside, those feelings are letting you know that you're abandoning yourself in some way. Now, we need to know this. This is why it's so important to be in the body, because the body lets us know immediately whether we're loving ourselves or whether we're abandoning ourselves. When I first started to practice inner bonding, I was in my head. I grew up to be a caretaker. I grew up to be tuned into everybody else's feelings, but not mine. My feelings didn't count. I had to take care of everybody else, but not me. How many of you grew up as caretakers? You don't have to raise your hands, but I know a lot. I know a lot of people did. A lot of people learned that their worth was in giving themselves up to take care of other people. That was me. And so I didn't know what I felt about anything. And it took me quite a lot of practice to remember to move from my head into my body. In fact, I had to wear this little gadget called a motivator, and it buzzed against my body every 5 minutes. And I would remember to check in. What am I feeling? What am I feeling? And I wore a rubber band to remind me, and I had notes all over the place to remind me, because I just couldn't even remember to stay in my body. And that's true of most of the people I work with, because we've learned to be in our head. But our feelings are in the body. This is what I call having your inner baby monitor on. Like if you have a baby and you want to be a loving parent, you don't put the baby to bed and go out to lunch, right? And in fact, what most parents do, if the baby is not in the room with them, is they have a baby monitor on. And the moment the baby cries, they go in, they pick up the baby, and they try and figure out what's wrong. Does the baby need to be fed? Does the baby need a diaper change? Does the baby need rocking? Is the baby lonely? What's going on? Well, that's what we need on the inner level. Imagine you got a baby in here, and that baby is letting you know through your feelings whether you're taking care of yourself or whether you're abandoning yourself. And so now at this point, since I've been practicing this for so long, if I get any twinge other than peace inside, I'm on it. What did I just say to myself? How am I treating myself? What am I ignoring? And so that I can deal with it right away. Because what I found is that if we don't deal with it right away, we kind of wind down into that rabbit hole. It kind of gets worse. And then we end up with anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, anger, aloneness, emptiness, all these wounded feelings that come about from self-abandonment. So, somebody say something? So, this is a practice. It takes practice. Like anything worth learning, it takes practice. And I hope you start to practice this journey from moving from your mind focus into body focus. It's one of the longest journeys you'll ever take, but one of the most important. Okay, now we move into step 3. In step 3, this takes a lot of practice. Step 3 is a dialogue. It's like, let's say you have a child who comes to you crying. If you're a loving parent, first you're gonna hold the child. And then you're gonna say, honey, what's upsetting you? What's going on? And even if the child is upset with you, you're going to want to know. A loving parent wants to know. Well, this is what we're doing on the inner level. We're asking let's say that it's anxiety that you're feeling inside. And we're asking, what am I telling you? What am I doing? How am I treating you? What am I not doing? that's making you feel this way? Or the depression, or the guilt, or the shame, or the anger, whatever it is that we're feeling. What am I doing? How am I treating you? This is so important to start to take accountability for ourselves. It's not about what somebody else is doing. It's about what we're doing. And then we go inside and we let the answer come from inside, not from our mind. So often when I do this with first-time clients, they say, well, I can't figure it out. And I say, don't figure it out. You can't figure it out. This is not a mind thing. Breathe inside. Let the answer come from inside. Because that soul, that inner child, will tell you if he or she trusts you to listen. Now, sometimes nothing happens. And what I say to my clients is that then you've got to start to work on being a loving adult. Imagine that you have adopted a foster child, and this child had been ignored or abused and comes into your home, and you want the child, you want to connect to the child, but you try to, and the child just doesn't trust you. And why should the child trust you? The child has had no experience in trusting you or anybody else. So it takes time if you bring in this foster child or you adopt an older child. It takes time. You have to be consistent. You have to consistently show up as that loving adult, and eventually that child will let you in. It's the same thing on the inner level. So if you don't get anything there, you want to be practicing taking care of yourself anyway as best you can until that inner part of you is willing to let you in on what he or she wants to say to you. So let's say that inner child says to you, yeah, I'm anxious because you're putting a lot of pressure on me. You're telling me that I got to do everything right. Or you're telling me that, I don't look right, I don't act right, I don't do anything right, I got to be perfect, I got to perform, I better not make a mistake. Well, of course I'm anxious when you're telling me these things. So if these are the kinds of things you find out that you're telling yourself, then you go a little deeper to that ego-wounded part of you. And that part can be many different ages. It can be 2, it can be 5, it can be 10, it can be an adolescent, depending upon when you absorbed a false belief. Because we absorb these the whole time we're growing up, or when you had some trauma in your life and you absorb beliefs from that. So we want to go a little deeper. We want to say to that wounded part, there must be a good reason that you're putting this pressure on us. What do you hope to gain by judging and pressuring ourselves and telling ourselves we have to do everything right and that we have to be perfect? What's the hope? And that wounded part might say, well, that's the only way that I can have control over getting the love I need, over getting the acceptance I need. Because if I don't get approval, I'm not okay. The only way I know I'm okay is if I get approval. And the only way to get approval is to do everything right and be perfect. See, so this is, and the reason I'm using this as an example is this is one of the most common things that I work with people, is that they put all this pressure on themselves to do everything right because their whole sense of self is tied up in getting approval. Imagine the stress that that's creating in your body. Once you understand what you're doing, and you understand why you're doing it, what you hope to control, then you go to step 4. And step 4 is you're opening again to that, whatever it is that you want to open to, whether it's nature or energy or a light or your older, wiser self or your concept of God or a guardian angel or a higher teacher, a mentor, somebody who's died who loved you. It doesn't matter. The energy is there. And when you open to learning, you're going to start to get information. So in step 4, you're asking 2 questions. What's the truth about any of the false beliefs Like, is it true that my worth is defined by other people? Is it true that I can control how people feel about me? These are not true. These are false beliefs. And the second question is, what is loving to me? What is the loving action? What action is in my highest good? And this is vitally important to take action. You know, like if a child came to you and said, I'm hungry, and you said, oh, thank you for sharing, but you didn't get food. Does it mean anything? Doesn't mean anything. So you can do the first 4 steps, and you can get that loving action, and a lot of people do, and then they don't do anything. So step 5 is you take the action. Now, this can be very challenging. When I first started doing this, I was in a relationship. I was married for 30 years, and I was the caretaker, and I was getting treated the way I treated myself. And as I started to practice inner bonding, I was asking, okay, if my husband is getting upset with me or judging me, and it doesn't feel good, obviously, what do I do? Because I would be like a deer in the headlights. Oh my God, I got to do something. I got to fix it. I would scurry around and try and make everything okay. I didn't want to do that anymore. It wasn't loving to me. And so after working with my higher guidance, I finally got the words which I had never heard anybody say, to say, I'm not willing to be blamed or shamed anymore. Now, very simple, right? I'm not willing to be blamed or shamed, and to walk away. That's what I was told the loving action was. I started to practice it. I started to rehearse it. The next time that happened, deer in the headlights, I completely forgot. And it took me a couple of months of rehearsing these words, because I had never seen anybody stand up for themselves like that, ever. Not in my family. And so one day, when this was happening, he was upset with me, and I very calmly came out of my mouth and said, you know, I'm not willing to be blamed and shamed anymore. I wasn't mad, I just said it, and I walked away, and my inner child went, yes! It was like, wow, I matter, I count. You're not going to treat me the way I was treated growing up, where I didn't matter. You're not going to keep treating me like I don't exist, like I don't matter. It was so powerful. That one thing was so powerful, because this inner child, this soul, suddenly began to matter, to exist, because I was invisible before that. Because I was invisible to me, because my feelings were invisible to me, I was invisible to everybody. It was easy to scapegoat me. It's easy to scapegoat you when you're invisible to yourself. And so this was a turning point. And of course, it took a lot more practice in a lot of different situations for me to learn to really take loving care of myself. It's a process. I'm going to be doing this my whole life, because I think that we're always presented with new situations. I'm presented with new situations, and I don't know what the loving action is in those situations. I have to ask. So often my clients say, well, yeah, I want to love myself, but I don't know how. Well, of course you don't know how. Where would you learn how? But you can ask, what is loving to me? So these are the 6 steps of inner bonding. They're on the website. They're in my books. I have little cards that people can get to carry around with them until you actually memorize these steps. So learning to take responsibility for yourself. Lots of people say, oh, it's too hard. Oh, it's a burden. Oh, it's not at all. It's not at all. As you learn to do it, you realize it's a privilege. It's a privilege, because as I got to know, as I started, okay, we're going to do a little process here. I'd like you to close your eyes for a moment. I want you to imagine yourself in a beautiful place in nature. someplace where you absolutely love to be in nature. And I want you to imagine that you're there with that higher part of you, your whatever God is, your older, wiser self, an angel, whoever it is that works for you, whatever works for you, is with you in this beautiful place. And imagine that you, as a little kid, are also there. And you as a little kid, you're playing. And I want you to ask to see who you are inside through the eyes of that higher self, through the eyes of the divine. And just see if you can see some of the beautiful, beautiful qualities that every single soul has, because we're a spark of the divine. See your basic goodness. See how wonderful you are when you laugh. See your ability to be empathic. See your particular form of intelligence. See your own kind of creativity. See what's really individual and unique about you. See whatever gifts you've been given, maybe in art or music or science or math. See your level of sensitivity. See if you can own these qualities, because these are who you really are. And as you look at this little child, your soul essence, is there anything that you see that's not good enough? This is before you started to tell yourself you weren't good enough, so you might be pretty young. Is there anything about this child that's not lovable and that doesn't deserve your love? So it's not a burden, it's a privilege. This essence, this beautiful soul in you, is worth loving. And I feel privileged to be the one to love that soul that's within me. And I hope you learn to feel privileged to love the beautiful soul that's within you, just like I felt privileged to love my kids. They weren't a burden, they were a privilege. Self-abandonment is not only the hidden cause of anxiety and depression and relationship problems and addiction and illness, but it is an underlying hidden cause of the greedy, self-serving actions that are causing our climate catastrophe. Just think about this for a minute. Think about what greed is. Think about where greed comes from. Greed comes from self-abandonment. People want more and more. They want to fill up more money, more things, in order to fill up the emptiness that's coming from self-abandonment. Now, certainly we can all do a lot of things to help what's going on our planet right now. But basically, how we treat the planet is how we treat ourselves, and how we treat ourselves is how we treat the planet. If we disrespect our inner terrain, our feelings, our gut, we're going to, in many ways, disrespect the planet. And my hope, of course, is that more and more people learn how to love themselves, learn how to take responsibility for themselves, care about themselves, so that they can truly care about our beautiful planet and do something about what's happening here. We just don't care about the effect of our behavior on others and on the planet until we truly care about ourselves.